Welcome to the deep dive.
Okay, so we've got another interesting batch of material sent in by you, our listener. This time we're diving into something, well, pretty complex, right? Demand planning, inventory management. It's crucial for anyone dealing with physical products.
It really is, and often a huge headache. And this stack is specifically from the Recurrency Help Center looking at their planning module. So it's a focused view on how one company tackles these issues. Kind of a specific case study almost.
Exactly. So our mission here is to really unpack what these recurrency documents are telling us. We want to get a handle on the problems they see in, let's say, traditional demand planning. And then, crucially, how they claim their system using data, using automation, changes that game. We're looking for the core ideas, the specific features they mention, and, the reasoning behind it all.
Yeah, the materials definitely set up this idea of a big shift, moving away from maybe tedious manual work and um, guesswork towards smarter database decisions, the goal being agility, staying competitive. Let's see how they flesh that out.
Okay, let's start right where the sources do. They paint a picture of the problems first. The pitfalls of doing demand planning. Let's call it the old-fashioned way. Based on this material, what are the real-world impacts when planning is, well, inefficient?
They're pretty blunt about it. Inefficiency basically stops a business from meeting customer demand effectively, which, I mean, think about that impact. It hits the bottom line directly. You get stockouts, painful ones, because you just don't have the stuff people are trying to buy. Missed sales, basically. But they also mention the other side of it, ending up with way too much inventory, which just sits there tying up cash and space. It's really lose-lose.
And the root cause they identify for this kind of situation.
They point straight at relying on legacy systems, older software, older methods. These often need constant manual input, constant reviews, people physically checking things, updating spreadsheets maybe. It's those really time-heavy manual workflows that they say become the major bottleneck.
Right, and manual isn't just slow, it's also, where mistakes creep in easily.
Yeah.
What do the sources say happens because of those errors, those potentially inaccurate forecasts?
Exactly. The sources explicitly link those manual, error-prone ways directly to bad forecasts. And if your forecast is off, your inventory levels follow suit. Either you don't have enough stockouts again, or you have way too much dead stock write-offs. It all stems from that initial reliance on manual effort, according to this.
It feels like in today's market, speed is everything. Sticking with that older approach sounds like more than just inefficiency. It sounds like a serious competitive drag.
It absolutely is, based on their argument. The sources contend that these outdated processes mean businesses just can't keep up. They can't react fast enough when the market changes, customer demand shifts, whatever it might be. And they fail to give that smooth, reliable experience customers now expect. You're just not positioned to compete effectively if you're bogged down like that.
Okay, that paints a pretty clear picture of the before. Now let's bring in Recurrency itself, as described in these help docs. What is the platform, fundamentally, and what's their big idea for solving this?
So it's presented as this comprehensive platform designed to simplify and automate big chunks of the supply chain. Specifically, they call out inventory, purchasing, and planning. So looking at it quite broadly.
And the overall philosophy driving this platform?
The material frames it as empowering businesses, giving them real-time insights, dynamic tools. The goal seems to be shifting from just reacting to problems to proactively optimizing things, using data to make better operational calls, which hopefully drives profitability.
They also list out some key benefits or value propositions from taking this approach.
Yeah, the docs highlight a few things.
Like,
Definitely increased efficiency because of the automation. Also, getting these data-driven insights, the idea is to avoid stockouts, have healthier inventory overall, and scalability. So the system should be able to grow with the business, handle more complexity over time.
but for this specific deep dive, we're really zoning in on that demand planning module.
Correct. And the sources describe that piece as using machine learning ML, using ML to generate smarter forecasts, and crucially, to proactively recommend replenishment actions.
Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts then, the transformation they're describing. How does recurrency, based on these documents, actually change the demand planning process compared to that manual world we just talked about?
Well, they talk about offering end-to-end solutions. The core idea is replacing those slow manual steps, the ones prone to errors, with automated tech that runs on data across the whole workflow.
Right, and the specific benefits they claim, this is where it gets concrete. Let's start with forecasting, this smart forecasting. How does it actually work, according to the material?
This is where the machine learning comes into play, as they describe it. The system takes in various inputs, your sales history, supplier performance data, demand patterns it identifies, and then it uses advanced ML algorithms to create dynamic forecasts.
Dynamic. That sounds like the key difference, right? Not just a static number you plug in.
Exactly. That's the emphasis. It's not like a spreadsheet you update once a month. These forecasts are designed to adjust automatically. Demand changes. Supplier lead time gets longer. Order cycle shifts. The forecast adapts. They frame it as moving from, educated guessing to data-driven precision that reflects current reality.
What I found really interesting in these sources was how the system apparently tailors recommendations based on different types of demand. It's not one size fits all.
That's a really important point they make. It adapts how it suggests replenishment based on whether an item's demand is, say, smooth and predictable or really erratic or even sporadic, barely sells sometimes. And this is where they get quite specific. They detail how it handles items with sparse demand.
Sparse demand. What does that mean in their definition?
They define it as items that have sold in 6 months or fewer over the past year. So not much activity. For those items, obviously, you can't rely on strong historical trends for a standard forecast. So the material says Recurrency uses a different calculation. It looks at things like the average monthly demand during that limited period, the lead times, historical usage if there is any.
And why is handling that sparse demand so tough for, say, simpler or older systems?
Well, because those traditional methods usually need consistent history to build a reliable statistical model. If you don't have much history or it's really unpredictable, the standard forecasting math kind of falls apart. You end up either massively overstocking just in case or constantly being out of stock. So the specific insight here, from Recurrency's perspective in these docs, is having a dedicated, tailored approach. Even for these low volume or perhaps new items, to give some intelligent recommendation instead of just throwing up your hands and guessing.
Yeah, that detail on sparse demand does make the difference clear. And talking about automation, they also mention automating the replenishment recommendations themselves.
Right. This is positioned as a huge time saver. The concept is essentially put most of the planning on autopilot. This lets the planning teams change how they spend their time. Instead of reviewing every single SKU manually, they manage by exception. They only need to jump in for items that the system flags or things needing a strategic decision.
They also bring up managing items in groups. Sounds simpler, but probably effective.
Yeah, a practical benefit. If you can group items maybe by supplier or by similar demand type and manage settings for the group, it saves a lot of clicking and potential mistakes compared to tweaking parameters for thousands of individual items one by one.
And underpinning all this automation and smarts is the system's ability to adapt quickly.
Exactly. The data feeding into it demands signals, current inventory levels, updated lead times from suppliers. It's refreshed regularly. So the system is always working with, ideally, the latest information. That constant feedback loop makes those dynamic forecasts and recommendations truly responsive. That's how they aim to cut the risk of being caught out by changes, ending up with too much or too little stock.
So it's not just set it and forget it. Yeah, it's automated, yes, but also continuously learning and adjusting. Okay, the sources also outline specific replenishment methods the system uses.
Yes, they detail 2 main strategies supported within this planning module.
The first one, and the one they seem to emphasize as the main approach, is dynamic minimum and maximum, dynamic min-max.
That's right. This method, according to the sources, isn't based on fixed levels. It's constantly calculated and adjusted. It uses key inputs, that historical demand data, the safety stock levels you configure, supplier lead times, and also economic order quantity, EOQ.
EOQ. Quick refresher.
Yeah.
What's that for anyone not living in supply chain acronyms?
Good point. Economic order quantity. It's a classic inventory calculation. It basically tries to find the sweet spot, the order size that minimizes your total inventory costs, balancing the cost placing orders against the cost of holding inventory. So dynamic min-max incorporates that kind of optimization logic along with the real-time demand and lead time data to set an ideal target stock range for each item, a range that moves.
Got it. A data-driven shifting range. What's the second method they talk about?
That one is order quantity, or OPOQ. And the sources explicitly note this is available for users of P21.
P21 being?
Profit 21. It's a well-known ERP system, especially in the distribution sector. So this OPOQ method seems integrated specifically for businesses using that ERP. And how it works is simpler, more traditional perhaps. Stock falls below a fixed order point number, and it triggers an order for a fixed order quantity. Very straightforward logic.
And how do the sources position OPOQ compared to the dynamic min-max?
is one better?
Well, there's a pretty clear note in the material. It says OPOQ is typically used more for exceptions or for specific situations, maybe like a fixed contract with the supplier where you always buy a certain amount. The implication is definitely that dynamic min-max is the preferred, more flexible default for most standard planning because it adapts constantly while OPOQ relies on those static preset levels.
That makes sense. The dynamic min-max seems much more aligned with that overall adaptive data-driven philosophy they describe. They also briefly mentioned that the calculations behind these recommendations differ slightly depending on whether an item is sparse or not.
Yes, it connects back to that sparse demand point. For regular items, the system uses the full forecast, lead time, safety stock, order cycle data, EOQ. The whole works in its calculations for either min-max or OPOQ. But for those sparse items where you don't have a reliable forecast, the calculation method to set the right levels specifically relies on lead time, the number of months of usage history you do have, and the average demand seen in that limited history. It just reinforces that idea of tailoring the approach based on the quality and type of data available.
Okay, so we've traced the path here based on these sources from the problems of the old way, introduced Recurrency's platform, detailed the features of their demand planning module, smart forecasting, handling sparse demand, automation, the different methods. Let's tie it all together for our listener. The so what? Why does understanding Recurrency's approach, as laid out here, actually matter?
Fundamentally, it matters because, as these sources present it, this kind of system aims to directly optimize how a business uses its key resources. We're talking about capital tied up in inventory, but also the valuable time of the planning team. By automating the routine stuff and providing better insights, it promises to free up both, reduce that manual workload dramatically.
Which in turn boosts overall operational efficiency, makes the whole engine run smoother.
Exactly. And in today's market, which is, let's face it, pretty unpredictable, that efficiency, that agility, it's not just nice. It's really critical for staying competitive. Being able to react faster to shifts in demand or problems with suppliers, it's essential.
And ultimately, the picture these sources paint suggests this allows businesses to achieve two really important things at the same time.
Right. First, serve customers better. Fewer stockouts, having the right products available more often. That leads to happier customers, more sales. And second, minimize the risks associated with inventory, less capital tied up in stuff that isn't selling, fewer losses from obsolescence or damage, and maybe the biggest practical benefit for the team itself, freeing them up, letting them focus on strategic thinking, supplier relationships, process improvements, instead of just drowning in spreadsheets and manual purchase order creation.
So we've taken quite a deep dive into this specific set of recurrency sources. We've gone from the frustrations of older manual demand planning to this vision of a data-driven, automated, and adaptive approach they're putting forward.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of moving from being reactive, relying on desk work and maybe outdated tools, to a more proactive system, using ML, aiming for better accuracy, less risk, and, just making the whole process more efficient by letting people focus on the exceptions, the important stuff.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you listening in to maybe mull over after this discussion. If automating complex, time-consuming tasks like demand planning really can free up significant team bandwidth, what are the biggest strategic opportunities or maybe the toughest challenges that your team could finally tackle if they weren't constantly bogged down by those day-to-day manual inventory worries?